The battlefield is quiet, but only for a moment. In the pale light of dawn, the rumble of treads cuts across the earth as a Sherman tank lumbers toward the front. Inside its steel walls, 5 men sit shoulder to shoulder, packed into a space no larger than a small family car. They are not thinking of glory. They are thinking of survival. For every man who climbed into one of these armored beasts during World War II, there was an unspoken truth. A single, well-aimed shot from the enemy could turn their steel shield into a coffin on wheels. The Sherman was America's most common tank, deployed by the tens of thousands across Europe, Africa, and the Pacific. Its silhouette became the very image of Allied armored power. But to the men inside, it was never just a weapon. It was a gamble. The thick armor gave them confidence against small arms and shrapnel, but against the German 88mm gun or a Panther's high-velocity cannon, that same armor could become a trap. The very steel meant to protect them could lock them inside with fire, smoke, and death. Imagine the senses inside that tank. The deafening roar of the engine, the acrid smell of oil and sweat, the constant vibration as treads grind forward. The crew knows that the battlefield ahead is filled with hidden threats, camouflaged guns, lurking panzers, and mines buried beneath the soil. Every mile forward is a step closer to disaster. The men inside try to mask their fear with small talk, with jokes, even with silence. But deep down, they all know, if the next shell finds its mark, they won't have time to think. They'll have only seconds before the Sherman becomes what so many tankers called it, a fiery tomb. The story begins here, in that tense march toward battle. A steel beast, 5 men inside, and the knowledge that with every turn of the treads, they're rolling closer to hell itself. A Sherman wasn't just a machine. It was a world for 5 men, each with a role that had to mesh like gears in an engine. In the driver's seat, knees pressed tight against levers, sat the man responsible for threading 30 tons of steel through mud, snow, or rubble. To his right crouched the bow gunner, hunched over his .30 caliber machine gun, ready to spit lead at enemy infantry that crept too close. Above them in the turret, 3 more men shared a space so cramped they could barely stretch. The gunner, eyes locked through the sight, the loader, hands raw from ramming shells into the breach, and the commander, perched at the top, head out of the hatch, scanning for threats. Each had seconds to act when the order came. A missed shot or fumbled reload didn't just risk failure. It risked death. Their trust in one another was absolute, forged by drills repeated until movements became reflex. The driver knew the gunner's rhythm. The loader anticipated the commander's next call, and the bow gunner was the silent guardian, watching for dangers others missed. They lived together, ate together, and fought together in the steel belly of their tank. Life inside was hot, filthy, and deafening. Oil coated their hands, the air stank of cordite after every shot, and the vibration of the engine never stopped. They joked to keep fear at bay, but each man knew the truth. Their fate was tied not just to the Sherman's armor, but to one another's split-second decisions. Brotherhood wasn't optional. It was survival. No training could prepare a crew for the moment the first enemy shells screamed in. The sound was unlike anything else. An 88mm round cut the air with a shriek that seemed aimed directly at their hearts. Inside, the men could feel the tank shudder as near misses through dirt and steel fragments against the hull. The commander barked orders, the driver swerved, the gunner squeezed the trigger, and the loader slammed round after round into the cannon's breech. All of it happened in seconds, yet time stretched painfully thin. Each man felt the invisible crosshairs. They knew the enemy wasn't shooting at Shermans in general. They were shooting at their Sherman. Every thud of impact rattled bones. Every flash through the periscope carried the question. Was that the round that would end it? The air grew hotter, tighter as tension mounted. The gunners outside never tired. They fired again, again, each shot another chance at piercing their steel home. It wasn't just fear of death. It was the torment of anticipation. Tankers described the waiting as the worst part, knowing that at any second the next shell might not bounce. They could only fight back, pray their armor held, and brace for the strike that might come at any moment. And then, the nightmare. A shell doesn't ricochet this time. It slams through, tearing steel apart like paper. In an instant, the interior erupts into chaos. Shrapnel, red-hot slivers of torn armor, ricochets around the compartment, slicing through flesh, bouncing off metal, embedding in bodies. The concussion stuns the crew, ears ringing, lungs burning from the shock wave. The loader may drop mid-motion, struck before he even realizes what happened. The gunner staggers, blood in his eyes, yet his hands still clutch the trigger. The driver feels a searing pain in his leg, but tries desperately to keep the Sherman moving, anything to get them out of the kill zone. The commander screams to bail out, but his voice is muffled under the roar of chaos. Inside, smoke and heat begin to build instantly. Wiring sparks. The smell of burning insulation mixes with the metallic tang of blood. There's no time to think, only instinct. Some die instantly, mercifully unaware. Others, wounded and disoriented, grope for hatches, fighting against shock and pain. For the first time, the illusion of protection is shattered. The tank is no longer a fortress. It's a trap. What seconds ago felt like a shield is now a prison, and survival depends not on the Sherman, but on whether the men inside can claw their way out before fire claims them all. Once a shell breached the Sherman, fire was almost inevitable. The tank's interior was crammed with fuel lines, lubricants, and most dangerously, dozens of high-explosive shells stacked in racks. When flames licked across a casing, seconds later the compartment became a furnace. The name Ronson wasn't a joke to the men inside, it was a grim reality. Just like the lighter that always lights the first time, Sherman seemed to ignite with terrifying ease. Flames roared upward, devouring anything they touched. Canvas seat covers burst into fire, paint blistered, and oxygen vanished in choking black smoke. Ammunition began to cook off, detonating randomly inside the tank. Bullets and fragments whipping through the air at point-blank range. The blast of each detonation rocked the crew, rattling teeth and filling the steel box with concussive shock waves. Survivors described the sound, the hissing of gasoline feeding the blaze, the thunder of shells exploding one by one, the groans of steel warping under heat. For the crew, the terror wasn't just the flames. It was the knowledge they had only seconds left. The tank had become an oven, every surface glowing with heat. Some men suffered burns before they could even touch the hatch handles. Their choice was brutal: stay and burn, or fight through searing pain to escape into enemy fire outside. Getting out of a burning Sherman wasn't simple. The tank had multiple hatches, but each posed its own nightmare. The driver and bow gunner had to fight upward through small floor hatches, often jammed or blocked by debris from the hit. The turret crew clawed at the top hatches, sometimes fighting over who could reach them first. In the choking dark, men stumbled over each other, blinded by smoke and blood. Seconds mattered. Veterans said a crew had maybe 10 to 15 seconds to escape before fire consumed the entire compartment. Panic set in fast. Gloves melted to skin as men tried to wrench metal handles open. If the tank had come to a stop at the wrong angle, One side's hatch might be pinned shut against the ground, leaving only one narrow exit. Even escape wasn't safety. Bursting out of a hatch meant exposing yourself to enemy snipers, machine guns, or artillery. Many crews died within feet of their Sherman, cut down before they even hit the dirt. But still, men leapt, rolled, crawled, anything to get clear of the flames. Those who made it out often carried the smell of burning flesh on their uniforms, the screams of trapped comrades echoing behind them. In the end, escape wasn't about courage, it was about instinct. Survival clawed from seconds of pure chaos. And yet, amid the horror, there were moments of breathtaking loyalty. Tank crews were bonded by something stronger than steel. They ate together, slept side by side, trusted one another with their lives, and when the tank was hit, that bond didn't break. Survivors often went back into the inferno to pull out wounded friends. Stories abound of commanders diving back into burning hulls, dragging loaders out by their scorched uniforms. Drivers, half blind from smoke, crawling back to pull their bow gunners free. Sometimes men went back more than once, staggering away with burns across their arms, refusing to stop until they had everyone out, or until the tank exploded. For some, the rescue attempts ended in tragedy. Flames or secondary explosions claimed both rescuer and wounded alike. But for those who survived, the act of trying mattered. Tank crews believed in an unspoken rule. No one is left behind. If you ran together. If you died as a crew. It was this loyalty, this unbreakable brotherhood, that made Sherman crews climb into their tanks day after day, even knowing the risks. They weren't fighting for glory or machinery. They were fighting for the men crammed shoulder to shoulder inside that steel coffin, trusting each other until the very last second. For the few who made it out alive, survival was only the beginning of another kind of hell. The blast of a penetrating shell often left men peppered with shrapnel, bones shattered, and eardrums ruptured from the deafening concussion. Burns were the most common and the most horrific. Fuel igniting inside a Sherman turned exposed skin into a battlefield of its own. Survivors described the pain as being skinned alive by fire. Many spent months in field hospitals, wrapped in gauze, enduring surgeries where doctors scraped away charred tissue, grafted new skin, and fought infections that killed nearly as many as the flames. Some soldiers lost limbs, their lives forever altered by seconds inside a burning tank. Others carried deep scars across their faces and hands, physical reminders of the war that never healed. And beyond the visible wounds were the unseen injuries, lungs seared by smoke, eyes damaged by the flash of explosions, nerves destroyed by the sudden shock of fire. But perhaps the cruelest wound was the survivor's guilt. Veterans spoke of watching friends trapped inside, screaming for help as flames consumed the tank. Some men escaped only to turn back and realize they were the lone survivor of a crew of 5. For decades after, they carried that weight, haunted by the question, why me and not them? And the Sherman steel didn't just leave scars on their bodies. It carved trauma deep into their souls. It would be easy to think the Sherman was unique in its dangers. It wasn't. Every tank crew on every side lived under the same shadow. German Tiger and Panther tanks had thicker armor, but once penetrated, they often suffered catastrophic jack-in-the-box explosions. The immense ammunition loads inside meant a single hit could blow a 50-ton turret clean off, killing the crew instantly. Even the most feared tank aces knew that if an Allied shell found its mark, their odds of survival were slim. On the Eastern Front, Soviet T-34 crews faced similar horrors. Their diesel engines were less prone to fire, but the cramped interior left little room to escape. When hit, the five-man crew was often trapped, suffocated by smoke or crushed as collapsing armor warped around them. Soviet soldiers grimly called their tanks brothers' coffins, knowing most wouldn't survive more than a handful of battles. British tankers endured their own nightmares. Early war cruisers were thin-skinned death traps against German 80s. Even the upgunned Firefly, armed with a deadly 17-pounder, was still a Sherman underneath, and crews joked bitterly that being assigned one was like holding a ticket to an early grave. No matter the flag painted on the armor, the truth was universal. Once a tank was hit, the difference between life and death came down to seconds, luck, and the will to escape. The steel might change, the engines might differ, but for every tanker in World War II, the battlefield carried the same nightmare. The coffin on wheels was a reality for all. For the men who climbed out of a burning Sherman, the war never truly ended. Long after the guns fell silent, they carried the sights, sounds, and smells of tank combat etched into memory. Veterans spoke of waking in the night, gasping for air, convinced they were back inside a smoke-filled turret. Others couldn't bear the smell of gasoline or the crack of fireworks, each spark a reminder of the inferno they once fled. Survivors also lived with survivors' guilt, a wound no doctor could stitch shut. Many admitted they felt they had abandoned brothers who couldn't escape. Some carried the weight quietly, never speaking of it to their families. Others only opened up decades later at reunions or in interviews, finally able to share the burden with those who understood. Yet amid the trauma was also resilience. Tank crews remembered the brotherhood forged in steel, the unspoken bond of five men who trusted each other with their lives. Many said that bond was the only thing that gave them the strength to climb back into another tank, even after losing friends in the one before. Modern tanks now feature armored ammo compartments, blowout panels, fire suppression systems, all born from the lessons of World War II. But for the men of the Sherman, there was no such protection. They lived, fought, and died in machines that could turn against them in an instant. Their scars, visible and invisible, became part of the untold story of armored warfare. And in remembering them, we honor not just their sacrifice, but the brutal truth of what it meant to fight from inside a coffin on wheels.